I just love being in the kitchen and put the pump of service, the drive, the creative energies of everyone in the kitchen who, you know, are all in the same wavelength of producing this beautiful food and making customers smile. It's just where I thrive.
This is the Deep in the Weeds podcast. I'm Anthony Huckstep. Over the last 2 years, we've seen many hospitality professionals leave the big cities for a tree change and immerse themselves in the regional dining scenes across the country. But there are some that made the move long before this recent upheaval in all our lives. What's the lure for a tree change, and what challenges and benefits does it pose? Carla Jones is the co-owner of Hilltop Store in Sawtell, New South Wales. Carla, how are you?
Yeah, I'm good. Huck, how are you?
I'm good. It's good to catch up with you. It's been a long time, but you left Sydney many years ago, almost 5 or 6 years ago, to move to Sawtell. What triggered that move?
There was a few factors. I guess the main one was family for me. I'd had my first child maybe 6 months before the move. So I had Huddy in January, and I think we'd moved living back in Coffs by September, with a little bit of travel in there. And yeah, he was a big reason for the change. Life dramatically gets different after a little baby's involved, and Sydney was hard. I didn't have much family around, and every time I'd come to visit Sawtell, like at that stage, both my sisters had moved home with their kids. I got a twin sister who's got 3 kids, and then whenever I came home, I saw her raising her family here in Sawtell with like the grandparent support, and she was also running a business, and it all just worked seamlessly. And I'm like, oh, that looks way easier. And then I had to convince my husband that small town living wasn't, that bad.
How hard was it to find a site that suited a means for your family?
It wasn't too hard. I'd always had my eyes set on the hilltop where we've got now. Even as a kid, I loved the site. Like, it's an old weatherboard building just on the hill outside of the main street, so it kind of is like a slightly iconic vibe around it, and everyone in the town knows it. But we did look at a few different sites beforehand because it wasn't available then, the restaurant we wanted. When we moved back, it was the Hilltop back then was a Chinese restaurant, which is still there. It's 2 occupancy site, and a yoga studio. And we approached the lovely Chinese couple that had the August Moon restaurant, and they weren't ready to retire yet, even though we'd heard they were. So that dream kind of fell through. And then we looked at a few other sites around town, and nothing really worked. And so we just, like, Richie was still working in Sydney at the time. Like, he'd fly down to Sydney on Monday and then fly back to Coffs on the Friday, have the weekend with us. And surprisingly, that was cheaper than rent in Sydney, flights and rent in Coffs Harbour combination. So we made that work for a little while. And then eventually that got a bit hard for the family life. So he moved back, and we got some part-time work while we just kept looking for the right site. And the lady who had the small yoga studio kind of offered that space as an option for us. And like, we always had our heart set on opening a dinner restaurant, and we thought that site was a bit too small and for what we had envisaged, but we thought, why don't we take it? Because at least then we're up there, and do like a little breakfast, lunch, small little cafe, but still with our, quality of food and knowledge. So we decided to give that a go, and a small renovation turned into a massive renovation in an old building. But we're there and it's working. We turned 4 in March. Yeah. But yeah, it's a dream realised, like from when I used to sit down in the pub in Sawtell and be like, that's the perfect spot for me one day, like to actually get it.
Well, I want to explore what you guys have created there and the connections you've created with the local community as well. But you grew up in the area. Take us back to when you were young. What was food like for you and your family?
Oh, I wish I had a nicer story. It's not bad. More like eating for survival. Like, it was never a celebrated thing. The dinner time was all like just feed the kids and get the job done. And like I love hearing the stories of like chef friends that grew up with, you know, picking their own vegetables and cooking with their mum and dad, but that just wasn't the case for us. We had three girls, probably always fighting with each other. Dinner time was always when Neighbours was on, so we always were in the, you know, had the oomph at dinner time because you couldn't pause it. You had to like turn it off and miss it. But it was always mum's a good cook. She always had she was more into baking, so we always had fresh biscuits and fresh cakes stocked in the pantry, sliced for days in the freezer. So that was always like really homely, and you'd help her cook bake her cakes and lick the bowls and that kind of stuff. But yeah, it wasn't like a big celebration of food growing up. It's more so now we're older and Richie and I have kind of introduced the like love around it, that they're all enjoying it much more.
When did you first start getting interested in food and see it as a potential career path?
I do remember that the actual day that I chose to be a chef, and I kind of like blindly led into it by my mother. We were holidaying. I remember we were holidaying at Burleigh Heads and walking along the beach and having that, you know, young teenage discussion, like they might have been 13, about, you know, what you want to do when you grow up. And I was like, I don't know. All my mum and my two sisters, they're all hairdressers, and I'm like, I just don't know what I want to do. And Mum, we were walking past a cafe. She's like, oh, you could work, you know, you like being in the kitchen, you could be a chef, you know, it'd be great. Look at this, by the beach, you could go for a swim on your break and, you know, finish work, go home, get the nighttime TV shows in. I'm like, this sounds interesting. And I was like, from then on I decided, I was like, yeah, let's do that. I can be a chef. And then when I started to follow it, the love grew much more. However, my life didn't turn out to be daytime swimming and stroll along the beach in the afternoon. More like 16-hour days in the trenches, which is just as lovely as walking on the beach.
Well, take us to those early years in your career. What were the really important moments that sort of started the career path for you?
Well, I started cooking when I was 17. So I loved it so much that every choice I made during my high school career was to follow hospitality and the tourism sector. So they're all my electives, and I chose from the beginning. And I left my high school where I attended, like I was with my twin sister my whole schooling life, and she stayed at one high school, and I decided to leave and go to another one because they had better cooking facilities and better programs for the hospitality industry. So I followed that from an early age, and I just every next step I wanted to challenge myself a bit more. And I guess I was lucky enough to always have a connection from my job, my current job, to where I was going next. So I never had a CV. Like, I don't think I've ever written a resume or a CV. I've just known someone who's worked in the next place and been lucky enough to land a job whenever I've shown up there. Yeah. But I remember one of the first gentlemen I worked with, who owned the restaurant here in Coffs, it's no longer here, he said, always try to take the next step and challenge yourself a little bit more, and never to go backwards. So I kind of followed that philosophy through my career.
Well, that theory of never going backwards, that led you to Sydney, and you worked in some incredible restaurants as well as opening an incredible award-winning restaurant as well of your own. Well, what was it like, that period of time, moving to Sydney and immersing yourself in that restaurant scene?
Yeah, well, I kind of took stepping stones to Sydney. I moved from Coffs to Brisbane for a little while, which kind of, I think maybe it was a bit more of a country town, Brisbane, back in 2002, I think I moved up there. So I finished my apprenticeship up in Brisbane, and then felt more confident to move to Sydney and work in some finer establishments. But yeah, my reason to moving to Sydney, I guess, was I finished my apprenticeship and I was at a place called Urbane in Brisbane, and I wanted to I always dreamt of owning my own place one day, and I wanted to learn like all aspects of the kitchen. And I hadn't done much pastry work, and there wasn't many places in Brisbane except for like big hotels that had pastry sections that I could go and like spend. I wanted to spend 2 years learning from, you know, a great pastry chef and getting those skills under my belt for eventually running a place. So I that's what made me decide to move to Sydney. So I packed up, and I luckily had met a chef at Urbane. He was just helping us out for a few weeks who knew Matt Moran. So he gave me Matt's mobile number. Probably should have got permission to give me Matt's mobile number, but he didn't. And I got to Sydney and I gave him a buzz and, yeah, organised a trial. I had to clean myself up, though. I was like, if I'm moving to Sydney to go to Aria, I was like in a little hippie phase, had dreadlocks and piercings. Not sure he's going to hire me, so I shaved my head and headed on down, dressed up all smart-like and went for an interview. Yeah, that's a while ago.
Well, tell us about what happened after that interview. You ended up spending time at Aria. What was it like in that kitchen?
Yeah, it was amazing, and that's one of my favourite moments in my career was working with Andy Honeysett, the pastry chef there. He is an incredible man, not just his skills as a pastry chef, but the fact that he is completely deaf, and you work with this man who understands you just by how you work and your body language, and was absolutely incredible. It was a massive team, Aria, and I think there was 20-something chefs. I've never worked in that kind of environment before. It was always small teams. And Andy was actually the first person who told me I'd never make it and I should go back to RSL in Sawtell. And I was determined to prove him wrong. So he challenged me the most, but we became great friends after that. That comment, eventually we became best friends. But the way he could understand the whole kitchen environment, not being able to hear anything, was amazing. Could feel the vibe. He knew as soon as it had changed tempo. It was incredible.
What did you take from that experience working with such a big brigade in Sydney at that sort of stage in your career?
It was much different to anything I'd ever done before. I was in those bigger kitchens. The pastry section is always kind of a little bit separate. So you have your own little workspace, your own oven, and every now and then someone comes to try to use it and you got to have a fight with them. But it was a challenge, not to name many names. Richie was one of them. It was a challenge to, fit in as well. There's so many different personalities and different styles of working with each other, and to find, how to read people and, get along with so many, personalities and make it work is quite amazing, that a head chef can bring them all together and make them work as a team, even though some of them don't like each other.
You also had formed an incredible working relationship with Colin Fassnidge over many years. How did that begin? I applied for a job. It was back in the four-in-hand before it was renovated. It was old school ghetto four-in-hand kitchen. And I just recently moved back from London about, when was it? 2009. I would have moved back, and I was just before Christmas. It was around October time, and I was like, I'll start looking for jobs. I sent a few emails out and just kind of gave them a brief rundown of where I was, where I'd come from, that I just moved back home to Sydney and was looking for work. And I remember I got an email from Colin saying, sorry, we're fully, staffed here at the moment, but we'll keep your name on file. And that was one day. And the next day it was actually, we've got a job now, which I understand much more now working with Colin. Turnover of stuff. So I was lucky enough that, it didn't take me long to find that connection with Colin. And I was I heard great things about the four-in-hand and what they were doing. But in my mindset, coming from London, and I was just been working in
some Michelin star places. I was like, I just really needed a job. And I was like, I wasn't sure if being in a pub environment was what I wanted, but I was like, I'll do this. I'll see it through Christmas was my plan. And once I started working there, I realised what a great team it was, an environment, and it wasn't just working with friends anymore. They became like family to me like quite quickly. Colin and Jane and the other chefs there, because it was nice to be back in a small team again as opposed to those big brigades. And I ended up not leaving and staying there because the food was incredible. Colin was tough but fair, and we got along really well, and I think we ended up working together for about 7 years after that, after my so-called Christmas stint.
Well, I want to explore what you did with Colin after that with 414, but you mentioned London and the Michelin star restaurants. Well, tell us a little bit about that period of time. What did you take from the experiences of the restaurants over there?
They were tough, but at the right age, they are fun, and your body can take a lot at that age. I don't think I saw the sun for a month on end. Like I'd start work so I was still doing the first 6 months there, I was still within my 2 years of doing my pastry. So the pastry chefs start work the same time as everyone else, but they finish later than everyone else. So, yeah, I'd be going to work, hopping on the tube at like 7:30 in the morning or 7 o'clock in the morning to be at work by 7:30 in the morning. It's pitch black, obviously, it's London and there's no sun at that time. And then, you finish work. You were lucky enough if you got the last tube, but that's at midnight. So a lot of the time you're, on the night buses and you just don't see the sun, and you're just stuck in this like small, not small rooms, but like dark rooms with like a bunch of blokes where you don't see the sun and you don't know what time it is. It was hard work. Yeah. Very hard work, but fun.
I mentioned 414. Tell us about the beginnings of that and what you created there with Colin and Jane.
Oh, it was the first restaurant I've ever been a part of opening from the beginning. And, it was such an eye-opening experience, just all the decisions that go into setting up a restaurant. And, like, I was just one piece of the big puzzle that owned it. I just helped, I guess, Colin design the kitchen and figure out what we wanted to do, and like we're very set on our style of cooking, with nose to tail and using secondary cuts and that kind of stuff. We were definitely going to do, but make it a bit less formal as the four in hand. And it was a great experience. I remember just having pictures stuck on the wall. It was all before Pinterest, I think, and you cut out magazines, pictures, and figure out your big design, and then the building of it. It's like, it was, big learning curve. That's for sure.
What did you love about the experience that you had of creating sort of and being part of your own restaurant for the first time?
Oh, you definitely keep more of an eye on what's happening in your kitchen, like your wastage and what other chefs are trimming off vegetables that could be used, and because that you've paid money for that and it's your money. And Colin was always good for teaching that kind of stuff. But we still had the four in hand then. Well, he still had the four in hand then with Joe. So he wasn't around as much. So I was tasked with doing his job and being he wasn't a bully. I'm not going to use the bully word, but being stern and, making sure the chefs are following what you want to follow. And that's something I was never great at doing. Like, I was never good at confrontation. And so I learned a lot about keeping chefs in line and what we were expected of them, to make sure they were executing it, and with being them respecting me at the same time. Yeah, that was a learning curve.
These days you have the Hilltop Store, and you originally wanted it to be a nighttime restaurant, or the idea of a nighttime restaurant in that region. What was the difficulties and challenges of creating that daytime venue, given you and your husband Richie had worked in sort of restaurants all your career?
It's a different style of cooking. Obviously, you're still sourcing the best ingredients and making your own sauces, and which, you know, sets you apart from the other cafes. And we've got, I know, a really good following now. But challenges like sourcing some of the products are a bit of a challenge up here, to be honest. Like, you think it's a great coastal town, but then back then, like 5 years ago, it was hard to just get the fish from the co-op straight to us. It'd get travelled down to Sydney and then you'd get it back on another flyer, and it's all changed now. There's a lot more beautiful restaurants that have opened up and are, you know, creating change for everyone, which is great. But yeah, challenging, sourcing some products was a big challenge. Also, working with your husband for the first time was a big challenge.
Well, tell us a bit about that, because both Richie and yourself are award-winning chefs in amazing restaurants in Sydney, and then working together in a business. How do you manage the creativity and the business side of things in that context?
The creativity is not hard to manage. We both love to sit down and flick through all of our hundreds of cookbooks and just see something like, and, you know, I'll go, oh, this would be great with, you know, snapper dish, or, you know, just throwing ideas around. So that's great. We've got the time to do that at night time, and whenever the kids go to bed, we can, you know, create together. And it's never been a hassle. We've never fought over something, or we've always, you know, the ideas seem to flow together. The business is hard, like a bit harder. Richie, I guess, takes the reins in the business sense of things, and he's very into the controlling the accounts and that kind of stuff, which I'm happy for him to do because I'm pretty hopeless with numbers. And I take control with the children. That's right. But yeah, it's great. It's worked out well. It was I was a bit nervous, you know, going into business with your partner and not knowing if it's going to work or if it could be complicated. But thankfully, it's been smooth sailing since day one.
Tell us about the local community. Was it difficult at first to connect with the local community, or were you sort of accepted quite easily?
Oh, we were very lucky to be accepted quite quickly. And I guess growing up here, that's being an old local helped, because they are a tough crowd if you're not from here. They are very, you know, set in their ways, and some restaurants have opened and not thrived because they've been out of towners, I guess, a little bit. So I was lucky enough to have, you know, my crew from school still live here, so they obviously help the cafe thrive. And yeah, so we were pretty lucky in that aspect. The customers are incredible. The local people, like, I get why some people don't like small town living and people always knowing your business as such and being involved, but they're also there when you need them and support you in the hard times, especially these last couple of years, going through, you know, restrictions and lockdowns and this roller coaster of COVID. We wouldn't have survived without our local customers and the community here. Being in a small town, there's no way.
What sort of impact has this big tree change had on you and your career and life? Has it had a big impact, the move from sort of the hustle and bustle of Sydney back to the region you grew up in?
Yeah, I feel a little bit out of the industry. Sometimes I feel like, oh, you know, that was the old us in the big circles, running hospitality circles in Sydney, and then something happens up here where, you know, someone walks into the cafe from your old life. Like, we've had Troy Rhodes from You stops in on his way up and just, you know, shocks you, and then Nino from Pendolino pops in with his family, and you're just like, oh, these people actually remember us. It just blows my mind when that happens, and I just feel so humble that, you know, that people are still making the effort to stop into Sawtell on their travels north. And yeah, we're very lucky to still be part of the big hospitality industry, but also a little bit separate from it.
What do you love about what you do?
Everything. I just love being in the kitchen and the pump of service, the drive, the creative energies of everyone in the kitchen who, are all in the same wavelengths of, producing this beautiful food and making customers smile. It's just where I thrive. Like, I joke with our customers, they're like, oh, another day at work. I'm like, no, this is my day off. I consider my work days my days off. My days at work are the ones home alone with the kids. It's just, it's my happy place.
The last few years have been challenging for so many in the industry. Have there been positives to come out of it? And how are you feeling about the year ahead?
I'm a bit nervous about the year ahead. Just the way it's starting has been probably the hardest part of this COVID coaster. It's just the unknown, I guess. You think it's going to get better and it just doesn't yet, with lots of people getting sick now up here. Like, we were quite removed. Like, we had to follow all the restrictions, but we never had many cases in Sawtell. So it was quite easy to still go about and go and get your coffees and not worry about, catching COVID, because you knew there was no cases here. Still have to follow all the restrictions and everything, but you knew you were safe. Whereas I think nowadays, with so many people being sick, like it's gone through our restaurant like wildfire. And then it kind of, a lot of people, I guess, were a bit more frightened to go out, who are, that really don't want to catch it, more frightened to go out and get their morning coffees and don't want to be around anybody. And it's just, it's been a harder start to the year than I pictured, that's for sure. So who knows what the year's going to hold. It's quite nerve-wracking. But thankfully we've survived so far, and we've got some, experiences under our belt from the last couple of years to know, if we need to change our model in the restaurant again. And like, we've just, at the moment, we're just doing takeaway only just to get staff levels and people off sick and be able to cover the 7 days of opening. So we've just shut it down and doing takeaway only. We're hoping to open up again this weekend to in-house dining, and we've got all our staff back to health, which, touch wood, is the last wave for a while.
Regional dining has really boomed in the last decade, and as someone that's made a success of that tree change, what sort of advice would you have for professionals looking to get out of the cities and have their career in a regional destination?
Oh, just do it. It's great. Don't take it. It's a great lifestyle. Come up, get a job. It's pace of life. It's just like what my mum sold me on when I was a teenager. Afternoon swims. No, it's a good choice, but yeah, you have to want to do it. It is, it's small towns. Moving to a small town, not being from there, might be challenging for some people, but it's definitely worked for us.
Well, Carla, as always, it's amazing to catch up with you and hear just a bit of your story. Congratulations on what you've built in Sawtell, and please keep in touch, and we'll catch up again soon.
Great. Thanks, Huck.
This is the Deep in the Weeds podcast. I'm Anthony Huckstep. Stay tuned as we take a deep dive into the lives of the incredible people who ply their trade in the food and hospitality sector. Special thanks to executive producer Rob Locke for making this all happen. Follow us on Instagram at Deep in the Weeds Podcast, or email us at podcast@deepintheweeds.com.au. Stay safe and be well.